Hi, I'm Marjie and I'm happy to be here. I was born in 1936 in Glasgow, Scotland. 1939, the war started. So I'm what you call a war baby. I lived through the Blitz, running down to the air raid shelters every night, your grandmother packing sandwiches and coffee, your dad carrying the bird in one hand, and all running to the underground shelters. So that's the story of being brought up during the war, is of bombs falling and of big air balloons over you in your playgrounds. And we didn't have a lot, but then every day was the same. So we didn't realize we were poor. You know, we didn't have a lot, we didn't get a lot. For Christmas, you got an orange in the boot of your stocking. You got some candy, and the biggest thing of all was you got a magazine. So that was lovely. But we're all happy. Everybody was the same, everybody was happy. And I think that's why the British are, I don't know, quite strong, because they had to put up with a lot during the war. There was no men around. After the war really got going, there was no men. My mum and dad separated when I was 3, which was very unusual in those days. So my mother was a single mother and brought me up with the help of my grandmother and her brothers and sisters. So I was very lucky that way. And then let me think. Okay. After the war, I would be 10 years old. But during the war, all the men were gone. And I have to tell a funny little story. They had what they called victory parties. So a woman would put on a party and all the children would be invited, and you came with your little tin cup around your neck. And they provided goodies. That was called a victory party. But after the war, the men came back. And as a 10-year-old, you wouldn't see much difference, except for the fact that we still didn't have a lot of food. Remember that Great Britain is an island. And during the war, people couldn't send us anything because of the Nazi submarines all around. We couldn't get in. So we had very, very basic food. And we had no farmers. It was land girls. So it was a different time of life. We lived on very basic but good food. You know, we were all happy and nobody really was depressed. I mean, it was go on with it, you know, just get on with it. After the war, all I remember is being sent, you go stand in that queue, I'll stand in this queue. You had a butcher, a baker, a dairy, a greengrocer, all these different places you had to stand in a line for food. So that took up a lot of time during the day, and I just played happily, whatever, went to school, ran around stupid. You know, we had a uniform. I went to a Roman Catholic school. I went to Garnet Hill Senior School, and it was run by the nuns. So I went to a convent. And we had a real uniform, and we had those riding hats. And I can always remember you'd go to school with your socks pulled up, your tie in place. 4 o'clock when you got out of school, down came the tie, down came the hat, and down came the socks, you know. So then you ran down the hill like crazy. I mean, you know, as a 10-year-old, there's nothing psychological, traumatic, unless your parents of people make it that way, and they didn't. The British people were very, very stoic. The Glaswegians are known for their sense of humor, so everything was with a sense of humor. I never thought we were bad. After traveling around to a lot of places with my 3 children, my husband and my 3 children, we came to Welland because my husband watched a newspaper business for all his life, the Globe and Mail, the Hamilton Spectator, and we decided that perhaps we could afford to buy a small newspaper in a small town. We'd never lived in a small town. So he chose Welland because that's where one of his ex-bosses lived. So we drove down to Welland. My mother was visiting at the time, and we sat down at the canal with the children and had a picnic while he went for his interview. Then we decided Welland was a nice little town, so yes, we'd come here. But it was a little problem. My son was finishing Ryerson, my daughter was finishing grade 13, and I wasn't going to pull them out. So he came down here and rented an apartment for a year and came back on the weekends. So that, unbeknownst to me, he saw a house he liked on Parkway Drive and he bought it. So then we came to Welland. Okay, and you know this, I think it was in the 80s. In the 80s, I think. And I went back to college when I was 40 to become a library technician. I always wanted to be a librarian, but I couldn't afford to go back to university. So went to college full time for 2 years, became a library technician. Unfortunately, when I got to Welland, I couldn't get in. There wasn't any, you know, it's a small town, people don't move around. There isn't another library to go to. And my dream was to work in Brock. I couldn't get in, tried everything. I was usually overqualified for things in offices, so I don't know where my husband got the bee in his bonnet, he and another friend, that this donut house on Main and Helms was a great thing. Marjie, you'll love it. I am not a business person, but I went in partnership with his friend. So I was in a donut house and it was open 24 hours a day. Believe me, that was an experience. I got to know all kinds of people, and I got to know at the end of a year that I couldn't stay in partnership anymore. I was with mildly a male chauvinist person. So we ended our relationship nicely, cordially, we're still friends. And then it was a very, very busy time because bakers are drama queens, they're divas. Very difficult to keep a baker and keep them happy. Middle of the night, Marge, the yeast is not working. Oh, okay, I'll be right down. Then you have to go to other donut house, borrow their yeast, and so that's how it went for quite a few years. And then my husband got a promotion to Niagara Falls he was the publisher of the papers. So he was the publisher of Niagara Falls, and he thought we should move there. So we moved there, lovely house, beautiful. Thoroughly enjoyed it, loved Niagara Falls. But in the meantime, I had grandchildren and I was running back and forth. So I thought, I said, John, I have moved, I don't know how many times for you. This is your time moving for me. So we moved back to Welland. We were back a year and we had a tremendous fire. I think you'll see it all in the papers. It was on Christmas Eve and it was just awful. I was in a coma for about 10 days. He was in a coma for about 3 weeks. We were flown from the Welland Hospital to the burn in a helicopter to the burn unit in Hamilton. So that was quite a time. I had a trach, couldn't talk, which was unusual. When I couldn't talk, had to write. My grandchildren came in to see me, loved it that Granny had to write. So I think we're moving on now, are we? I came to Canada when I was 20, and the reason I came was I was engaged to a young boy in the Air Force, and he was sent to Aden for 2 years. So my mother said, you're not going to sit around for 2 years, surely. So I thought, I've always wanted to go to New Zealand. So I thought, I'll go for a year and I'll be back when he comes back. So I went to the immigration and they said, well, to go to New Zealand for a year doesn't make sense. Because at that time, I believe it took 6 weeks on a boat to get to New Zealand. So they said, why don't you go to Canada for a year? And I did. And at that time, it wasn't jets. So I was very sick coming over. Now, I was coming over by myself. At that time, I didn't live with my mother. My stepfather had thrown me out. So, I lived with my mother's sister. And I needed my mother's permission to come to Canada. So she signed it. And I promised her I'd be back for her birthday. So my mother wasn't happy I was coming by myself. So my mother's sister-in-law, sister-in-laws had emigrated over here. So Mrs. Robertson said she would be very happy for me to stay with her in Ottawa. So I got on the plane, sick as a dog, because it used to stop in Gander, because the planes couldn't go that far then. That's how old I am. So, and then I got there. I was picked up at the airport by Richard and George, and they had a little Volkswagen, and there was a big hole in the floor, and they had no heating, and this was January. And I came with my nice bird coat, high heels, no boots. So it was kind of funny. So that was my entrance to Canada and Ottawa. When I was 15, I was working, and I loved to read. I couldn't give you a favorite book. When I was a child, I went to the library every single day. I'd read encyclopedias, I'd read the back of cereal boxes. And when I started working and my mother left for the house before me, the last thing she would say, Marjie, your bus is at 8:30, don't miss it. And I did miss it a couple of times. And I had a boss, Mr. Young. And in those days, they used to call everyone Miss McWilliams. Do you think if you had your breakfast the night before, you could be on time? So there you go. When I had the donut house, Welland was great. Lovely, that Main Street. If you had any kind of business in Welland on Main Street, you shopped on Main Street. At that time, I think they had 3 shoe stores, 2 drug stores, 2 men's stores, a couple of ladies' stores, about 3 or 4 banks, a movie house. It was bustling. But then what happened was the decline of it was the fact that the taxes were so high. We were being taxed as if it was like the days when Welland was busy, But now the Seaway Mall had come in. And at one time, the people on the merchants on Main Street had the chance to let Eaton's in, which would have been great, and they turned it down. So then what happened when the Seaway Mall went in, of course, a lot of business left Main Street. So they gradually started closing, moving out, and that wasn't good for us. And then my husband was the publisher of the Tribune, and they went on strike. And that's when we realized we couldn't afford a small newspaper, because you couldn't afford to keep it on strike. And it was very nasty. There was car bombs and everything. My husband had to escort his workers in. And then there was a group of them that started up a little paper called The Guardian. And it was on the opposite corner of my store. And they blackballed my store, and they walked up and down with signs and all place. And they used to phone my house in the middle of the night and then hang up. So my phone was no use. So we had to get a private phone. Very interesting. So Welland, yeah, I belonged to all the businessmen's groups and that on there. And it was very interesting because Welland is a small town. And coming from Toronto, they still had the image of male chauvinist. I can remember being on a board, and this is one of my friends was on the board, and we're voting, and he said, oh, Marge will vote the same as me. No, it was a very small town, but a very happy little town at that time. I enjoyed being part of all the merchants there. We used to walk up and down, buy your shoes there, buy your clothes. It was great. It was a nice little town. So it was too bad when they all started closing, because, and we even hired a lawyer to try and fight for us, but we just didn't get it. I would like to say in life, everyone has a choice. You can wake up in the morning and you can say, I'm going to be happy. Or you can say, I'm going to be sad. So that is your choice. And if you are happy and put a smile on your face, that can make a big difference to other people. And if you go up to someone and say, hey, you look nice today, that makes them feel good. So I think it's very important not to just be aware of yourself, but to be aware of how you affect other people. And I would also like, this is funny. I was born in Glasgow and I will always be a Glaswegian. I am a Canadian, but secondly, I am a Glaswegian. You can take the girl out of Scotland, but you can't take Scotland out of the girl. I'm very proud of that.